Most people think a rocket explosion is just a rocket explosion. It's not. Blue Origin didn't just lose a rocket on May 28th. They lost the only place on Earth they had to launch one, and the consequences haven't finished arriving yet. Around 9 p.m. Eastern on Thursday, May 28th, the Florida coast lit up like a second sunrise. Cameras at Cape Canaveral were already rolling, live stream chat rooms were already counting down, and a 321-foot machine called New Glenn was sitting on its pad, fully fueled, bolted to the ground, waiting for 7 of the most powerful methane engines ever built to ignite for what was supposed to be a brief, entirely routine test. The flash came first, a single blinding burst of white light that overloaded every camera pointing at it, washing the entire frame to white before fading back into something far worse. Then the fireball, then another fireball larger than the first, then a mushroom cloud, a genuine textbook mushroom cloud that climbed high enough to register on weather radar. The blast wave hit homes in Cocoa Beach. People watching television felt the ground move under them. The orange glow was visible from highways 50 miles inland near Orlando. By Friday morning, Blue Origin was warning beachgoers that pieces of rocket might wash ashore in the coming days. That is how large it was. Pieces of rocket, miles away. And what makes this explosion different from every other rocket failure in recent memory is not the size of the fireball. It is not the mushroom cloud. It is not the shockwave that rattled windows across the Cape. It is what was standing next to that rocket when it went up, and what was depending on it. From Amazon boardrooms to NASA mission planners, to the people in Beijing watching the footage on a screen Friday morning and quietly doing their own calculations. All of it connected, all of it now in question. And the official statements you will read over the coming weeks will not tell you any of that directly. I'm going to. This was a static fire test. In rocket engineering, a static fire is one of the most standard procedures in the pre-launch checklist. You bolt the rocket to the ground, you fuel it, you ignite the engines for a few seconds. The rocket goes nowhere. You collect data. If the numbers look clean, you roll it back to the hangar, perform final checks, and launch within days. It is not experimental. It is not dramatic. It is the kind of thing that gets done quietly before almost every significant launch. A final confidence check before the real thing. New Glenn's 4th mission, NG-4, was scheduled for June 4th, 1 week away. The payload waiting in a clean room across Florida was a stack of 48 Amazon LEO satellites. The first batch in a contract worth billions, the opening move in Amazon's plan to build a global satellite internet network to compete directly with SpaceX's Starlink. The static fire was supposed to be the last routine step before that mission began. It was not routine. From the footage, analyzed frame by engineers and technical commentators within hours of the explosion, this was not a fire that built gradually. This was not a slow leak that became a burn that became a catastrophe over minutes. The audio captured miles from the pad did not record engines spooling up. There was no rumble of ignition building to failure. There was background noise, and then a single sharp pop, the acoustic signature not of a fire getting out of control, but of a tank rupturing instantaneously. 0 to total destruction in the time it takes to draw a breath. Whatever failed. It failed all at once. The rocket is gone. But here is what the press releases carefully stepped around. Launch Complex 36 was not just a launch pad. It was the only orbital launch pad Blue Origin had. Not a primary site with a backup facility. Not a main pad with a secondary option in another state. The only one. Full stop. The original LC-36 dates back to 962. Built to launch the Atlas Centaur, the workhorse of America's early space program. Across 6 decades and 148 launches, it became one of the most historically significant pads at the Cape. Blue Origin demolished the old structures entirely and built one massive new pad in their place, engineered specifically around the dimensions, weight, and flame trench requirements of New Glenn. The reconstruction finished in 2021. It was the first newly rebuilt launch complex at Cape Canaveral since the 1960s. Blue Origin spent over $1 billion building it. There is not another pad like it in the country. Now consider what SpaceX faced in September 2016 when a Falcon 9 exploded on Pad 40 at Cape Canaveral. The rocket was destroyed. An expensive Israeli communications satellite on top of it was destroyed. The Falcon 9 fleet was grounded for 3.5 months. Pad 40 itself was out of action for more than a year. But SpaceX had options. They moved launches to Pad 39A at Kennedy Space Center. They used Vandenberg in California. They kept flying while the reconstruction happened. Blue Origin does not have options until LC-36 is rebuilt. Based on what happened to SpaceX in 2016, you are looking at a minimum of roughly 1 year before it can host another rocket, possibly longer depending on the extent of subsurface damage to the flame trench and propellant infrastructure. Every New Glenn that currently exists, and every New Glenn still being assembled in the factory, has nowhere to go. And the calendar, as we are about to discuss, does not care. Amazon is now in serious trouble. Their entire satellite internet business, Project Kuiper, the service they have committed over $10 billion to building in order to compete with Starlink, depends on getting satellites into orbit fast. Not eventually, not at a comfortable pace. Fast. Here is where they stand. SpaceX has over 7,600 Starlink satellites in orbit, serving more than 10 million subscribers. Amazon has between 210 and 241 satellites in orbit, depending on which week you count, and 0 paying customers. And the Federal Communications Commission requires Amazon to put 1,618 satellites into orbit by July 30th, 2026. That is approximately 2 months from now. Amazon has filed for a 2-year extension, but the math is brutal regardless. The 24 launches Amazon contracted with Blue Origin were the workhorse of the deployment plan. NG-4 June 4th was Launch 1. There is no Launch 1 anymore. The 48 satellites were not aboard during the test. That is the single piece of good news in the entire story. But the other 23 contracted launches are now sitting in limbo, waiting for a pad that does not exist and a rocket that cannot fly until it does. Amazon has alternative providers, Falcon 9, Ariane 6 Vulcan, but each one comes with hard constraints. Falcon 9 is operating near maximum capacity. Ariane 6 has its own scheduling limitations. And Vulcan, as we will discuss in a moment, just inherited a very serious problem of its own on Thursday night. Imagine being Andy Jassy, CEO of Amazon, one of the most powerful companies on Earth, at home on a Thursday evening when your phone lights up with livestream footage from Florida. A massive explosion. Your biggest launch partner's only pad in flames. Your satellite constellation's primary vehicle gone. Your FCC deadline unchanged. That was his Thursday night. And the part nobody wants to say out loud yet. It gets worse from there. 2 days before the explosion, May 26th and 27th, NASA announced a package of contracts worth nearly $1 billion for its Moonbase program. Buried in that announcement, Blue Origin. The award, $188 million, with an option period worth an additional $280 million for the delivery of 2 lunar terrain vehicles to the Moon's South Pole. The rovers that will roll across lunar dust where Apollo never reached. The wheels that will leave the first American tracks on the lunar surface in over 50 years. Blue Origin won that contract days before their only rockets-only pad was destroyed. But the lander carrying those rovers, the Blue Moon Mark 1, does not have its own ride to the moon. It launches on top of New Glenn. The same New Glenn that is currently scattered in pieces across Cape Canaveral. Blue Moon is too large for any other rocket's payload fairing. Too heavy for any other vehicle to carry. There is no alternate launcher. There is no contingency architecture. There is no path to the Moon's South Pole that doesn't run through New Glenn from LC-36. NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman posted a careful statement on Friday morning. He said the agency was aware of the anomaly. He said NASA would work with partners to support a thorough investigation. He said spaceflight is unforgiving. He did not say that Artemis 3, the low Earth orbit demonstration of Blue Moon, scheduled for mid-2027, depends on New Glenn. He did not say that the Moonbase 1 mission targeted for later this year depends on New Glenn. He did not say that Artemis 4, the mission that will actually put American astronauts back on the lunar surface, depends on Blue Moon to land them. He did not have to. The math says it for him. And here is the number worth knowing before we go any further. The Artemis program was originally supposed to put boots on the moon by 2024, then 2025, then 2026. The current target is 2028. Every single one of those slips happened before Thursday night. Now add a year, or more, to New Glenn's return to flight. Now ask yourself what happens to 2028. There is another problem hiding in the smoke, the BE-4. 7 of them were bolted to the bottom of New Glenn's first stage. Each one produces approximately 640,000 pounds of thrust at sea level, burning liquid methane and liquid oxygen in an oxygen-rich staged combustion cycle. Powerful, complex. And this is the part that extends the story well beyond Blue Origin. They are the exact same engines that power United Launch Alliance's Vulcan Centaur rocket. 2 engines per Vulcan instead of 7. But same design, same hardware, same supplier. The BE-4 has a history worth understanding. The engine was announced in 2014. It took until 2024 to fly, a full decade of development, plagued by redesigns, delays and failures. On June 30th, 2023, a BE-4 exploded 10 seconds into a ground test, damaging the test stand. Blue Origin investigated, made changes, and the engine eventually flew successfully, first on Vulcan in January 2024, then on New Glenn. The engines have worked. They have also blown up before, on the ground, during exactly the kind of static fire test that just destroyed LC-36. If the investigation finds that a BE-4 engine failure initiated Thursday's explosion, the Vulcan program carries a serious question mark over its next flight. And Vulcan carries critical national security payloads for the Department of Defense. Space Force satellites, missile warning systems, intelligence assets the United States cannot afford to delay, reschedule or leave in question. A BE-4 grounding would not stay contained to Blue Origin. It would extend to EULA. It would put America's 2 primary heavy-lift options under simultaneous constraint at the exact moment the country needs them both operating at full capacity. Spaceflight Now, the publication that covers the launch industry more closely than anyone, raised that exact concern within hours of the explosion. The investigation has not concluded anything yet. The root cause is still being pieced together from telemetry data and the molten remains of a launch pad. But every hour that passes without a clear answer keeps the worst-case scenario on the table. This was not the first warning. New Glenn's third flight, April 19th, ended with a stranded satellite. The mission carried a spacecraft for AST Space Mobile, a company building space-based cell towers designed to beam mobile coverage directly to your phone from orbit. The satellite was expensive, purpose-built, and designed for a very specific orbital slot. The first stage performed perfectly. It even landed on a drone ship in the Atlantic, exactly the kind of reusability demonstration Blue Origin desperately needed, because reusable first stages are the only path to competing with SpaceX on cost. But the upper stage failed. A cryogenic propellant leak froze a hydraulic line solid. The engine couldn't gimbal correctly. Thrust pointed the wrong way. The satellite was released into a useless orbit, one from which it could not operate, and from which it eventually deorbited and was lost. The FAA grounded New Glenn, ordered an investigation, identified 9 corrective actions, and cleared the rocket to return to flight on May 27, 2026. Now hold that date. The FAA released their clearance, May 27th. New Glenn was burning on the pad less than 36 hours later. The agency had just cleared a rocket whose full engine stack had not yet been tested as an assembled system on the pad. The static fire was that test. And the engines answered the question for everyone in the most definitive way possible. That is not a criticism of the investigators. Sequential failures arriving faster than the paperwork between them is simply what bad streaks look like in aerospace. But it is the context that every official statement this week has carefully avoided placing front and center. 2 failures, back to back. The second one arriving for the investigation into the first had fully closed. That is the pattern that concerns engineers far more than any single anomaly. A fully fueled New Glenn weighs over 2,300 tons. Almost all of that weight is propellant. liquid oxygen and liquid methane. Two of the most energetically reactive chemicals that human beings have learned to handle in industrial quantities, stored at cryogenic temperatures, loaded under pressure, contained in tanks engineered to tolerances measured in fractions of a millimeter. When that mixture escapes containment and ignites simultaneously, not in a controlled burn through a rocket nozzle, but all at once, the energy release is classified in the same order of magnitude as a small tactical weapon. Technical analysts estimated the blast yield at least 1 kiloton, large enough to produce a textbook mushroom cloud, large enough to appear on weather radar, large enough that the pressure wave, visible as a defined ring propagating outward from the pad in the camera footage, was not the rolling shockwave of a fire. It was the sharp, instantaneous shockwave of a detonation. The sound confirmed it, captured from miles away. Not a rumble, not a roar. A single sharp pop, the acoustic signature of tanks rupturing instantaneously, not a fire building to catastrophe. Zero to total destruction in less time than it takes to register what is happening. If you had been standing on the pad, there would be nothing left to find. If you had been standing a mile away, the heat would have hit your face like an oven door slamming open. The people who were there, running the test, were at a safe distance because static fire protocols require it. Nobody was hurt. That is not luck. That is procedure working exactly as designed in the one area where Thursday night went right. But everything standing close to the rocket had no such protection. The transporter erector, gone. The lightning towers, gone. The pad infrastructure, gone. The ground support equipment built specifically for New Glenn's dimensions, gone. Over $1 billion of infrastructure. Vaporized in under a minute, Jeff Bezos posted on Friday morning. The statement was short, composed. The kind of language you write after spending 2 hours as alone before opening a keyboard. All personnel are accounted for and safe. It's too early to know the root cause, but we're already working to find it. Very rough day, but we'll rebuild whatever needs rebuilding and get back to flying. It's worth it. Elon Musk responded with a single line. Most unfortunate, rockets are hard. 7 words. From the CEO of a company with 140 to 145 launches planned for 2026. From the founder of a company valued at between $175 and $2 trillion. From a man who watched his largest American competitor lose its only launch pad on national television, while tens of millions of people watched on live streams. The statement is true. Rockets are hard. Everyone in the launch industry knows it. But those 7 words also carry the weight of a man who watched a gap, already enormous, widen further. Blue Origin had planned 8 to 12 New Glenn launches in 2026. SpaceX has 140 to 145. That gap was staggering before Thursday night. It just became complete for the remainder of the calendar year. The company is valued at approximately $100 billion. SpaceX is preparing a public offering at a valuation between $175 and $2 trillion. The market is not sentimental. It will not wait politely while LC-36 gets rebuilt. The customers who had contracted New Glenn launches are already, quietly, having conversations with other providers. Some of that redirected business will not come back even after New Glenn returns to flight. That is what 7 calm words from a competitor sound like when they carry the full weight of context behind them. Here is the wider context that no official statement will say out loud. The American launch industry has effectively consolidated into 2 providers, SpaceX and Blue Origin, the Department of Defense, NASA, Amazon. Every commercial satellite operator that needs orbit, they all depend on one of those 2 companies. The redundancy that policymakers point to when asked about America's launch resilience is thinner than the public is typically told. There is a very narrow margin between the American space program operating normally and operating under significant constraint. When one of those 2 providers loses its only launch pad on a night that should have been routine, the entire American launch architecture wobbles. Vulcan shares the same engine. Artemis shares the same lander. Amazon shares the same manifested launches. National security shares the same assumption that options don't all collapse at once. Thursday night exposed the gap between the assumption and reality. And there is a country that noticed. On the morning of May 29th, China's space program was not announcing failures. They were operating Tiangong, their fully crewed space station, on schedule. Their Chang'e program had already landed on the far side of the moon, something the United States has never done. Their lunar lander program, the LM-9 architecture, is in active development with engines already tested. Their taikonauts are training for a lunar surface mission. China's stated target for a crewed lunar landing, 2030. They have hit their previous milestones on schedule. Their infrastructure is not currently smoking on a Florida beach. Their timeline depends entirely on their own hardware, their own pads at Wenchang and Jiuquan, their own supply chains. They do not share engines with their competitors. They do not have a single point of failure that eliminates their entire launch capability for a year. Imagine sitting in Beijing on Friday morning, watching the footage loop on a screen, and asking yourself one question: how long before America catches up to where they thought they would be next month? The honest answer, for the people who follow this professionally, is somewhere between several months and several years. Every day LC-36 is dark is a day the gap between American and Chinese lunar capability holds steady or narrows. Every Artemis milestone that slips is one more data point in a geopolitical calculation that extends well beyond rocket engineering. The race back to the moon was already tight before Thursday night. It just got tighter. Blue Origin will rebuild. Bezos has the money and he said as much. The pad will be reconstructed. The investigation will identify a root cause. Engineers will redesign what needs redesigning, requalify what needs requalifying. At some point in some month of some year, a New Glenn will roll out to a rebuilt LC-36 and try again. That is how spaceflight works. Always has been. You fail, you analyze, you fix, you fly. Every nation that ever reached orbit started by losing rockets. The history of humans leaving this planet is written in fire as much as in success. Thursday night is one more page in that book. But there is a cost to this particular fire that extends beyond the hardware. The investigation will take months. The root cause may implicate the BE-4 engines, or it may not, but until that answer is definitive and public, every Vulcan Centaur flight carrying a classified national security payload carries a question alongside it. The customers who had contracted New Glenn capacity will quietly redirect some of it, and some of that business will not return even when New Glenn does. The satellites that fall short of FCC deadlines will require renegotiation, and renegotiation has costs. The lunar contracts will sit in suspended animation, waiting for a rocket that cannot fly until a pad that doesn't yet exist is built from a design that needs to be re-engineered around whatever the investigation finds. And the question, quiet, real, and now impossible to ignore, of whether one bad night can erase an entire company's launch capability for a year, will follow Blue Origin into every investor meeting, every customer conversation, every government contract negotiation for years to come. When you watch the official statements over the coming weeks, and there will be many, remember what you are actually watching. You will hear Blue Origin promise to rebuild. Bezos will post calm updates as the work progresses. NASA will express confidence in its partners and commit to thorough investigation. The FAA will explain, correctly, that static fire tests fall outside the scope of licensed flight operations and therefore outside their direct jurisdiction. None of that is dishonest. None of it tells you the full picture. What you are actually watching is a stress test of American launch architecture, of Artemis program timelines, of the assumption that private space competition creates robust redundancy, that just delivered a very public, very visible result. You started this video thinking a rocket exploded at Cape Canaveral. Now you know what actually happened, and everything it connects to. Let every thread close. This was not just a rocket explosion. It destroyed the only orbital launch pad Blue Origin owns, a $1 billion facility with no backup, no secondary site, and no alternative architecture, with a minimum rebuild time measured in years, not months. The blast was enormous, estimated at approximately 1 kiloton, visible 50 miles away in Orlando, registering on weather radar, shaking homes across Cocoa Beach. Not a gradual fire, but an instantaneous detonation of over 1 300 tons of cryogenic propellant. This was not the first warning. The April 19th upper stage failure stranded a satellite. The FAA cleared New Glenn on May 27th, and less than 36 hours later the rocket was burning on the pad. 2 sequential failures with barely a day between them. Amazon's Kuiper constellation is in serious jeopardy, with 618 satellites required by the FCC by July 30th, 2026. Their primary launch provider is now grounded indefinitely, with no pad to fly from, and 23 contracted launches in limbo. NASA's Artemis lunar program depends on New Glenn. Blue Moon Mark 1 cannot launch on any other rocket, making the 2028 crewed lunar landing target. Already slipped 4 times before Thursday, genuinely uncertain. The BE-4 engine concern extends to Vulcan Centaur. The same engine at a different configuration powers Eula's rocket carrying classified national security payloads, and until the investigation concludes, that program carries a question mark it did not have on Wednesday. Blue Origin had 8 to 12 launches planned for 2026. SpaceX had 140 to 145. That gap was already vast. It just became complete for the calendar year. America's launch architecture is more fragile than publicly acknowledged. 2 providers, one now grounded, sharing engines with the other, both critical to national security and the lunar program simultaneously, with China hitting its own milestones on schedule and watching. The geopolitical implications are real. China's 2030 lunar landing target depends on none of this American infrastructure, and every month of LC-36 darkness is a month of competitive advantage that arrives without a single Chinese rocket leaving the ground. The fireball is gone. The smoke has cleared. What remains is the slow, expensive, painful work of finding out exactly what failed, rebuilding what was lost, and convincing everyone who depends on Blue Origin that next time will be different. Bezos is right about one thing: it is worth it. Spaceflight has always been worth it. Every nation that ever reached orbit started by losing rockets, losing pads, losing years. The road back to the moon is not paved. It is built one rocket at a time, and every now and then one of them comes apart in front of you, and the only thing you can do is start over. Blue Origin will start over. What is in question is not whether they rebuild. What is in question is the price. The months that go dark, the customers that quietly redirect, the missions that slip, the deadlines that pass, the lunar timeline that now depends on a rocket that doesn't yet have a pad to launch from, and the question, quiet, real, now impossible to ignore, of what the moon looks like by the time it does. The pad will be rebuilt, the rocket will fly again. The only question is what the moon looks like by the time it does. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.